Well, Carl, what do you think? Should we get going?
I think it's pretty close to time. We may get one or two more people on Zoom here, but yeah, let's go ahead and get
All right.
started.
We are recording, and I assume everybody at Lone Tree can still hear us. It sounds like you guys are muted, so we're gonna get rolling. Are there any guests there at Lone Tree? I can't really tell.
Anybody that's first time? Hi, I did show up on the screen one time. This is the first time. First time you've been here. Okay, so we've met you before. Nobody new here.
Nobody new there?
Okay.
Carl, do we have anybody on Zoom?
Stephanie, yeah.
Stephanie?
Hi, everyone. Apologies. I'm a little bit under the weather, so I'm going to be off video for today.
That's fine. If you would just introduce yourself, give a little bit about the type of photography that you do, how you found our club, etc.
Sure. So just a little background on me. I moved to Denver about 2 years ago after nearly 20 years in New York. Day job is in corporate. And with photography, I picked up a camera in 2019, actually, at the very end of a 15-country, 5-continent gap year. I was comparing my photos to someone with an iPhone, and for the landscapes we were doing, there was just, and at least the phone that I had, there was no comparison. I shoot everything at this point and focus a little bit more on street, architecture, landscape, basically everything related to travel.
Very nice. Well,
Sounds great.
the gap here sounds awesome. I wish all of us could do that.
Hey, Carl?
Yes, sir.
Yes, it was amazing. I would just love to come back.
Oh, sorry. We just had two new guests come in and join us here at Lone Tree.
Well, cool.
Yeah, if you could just give us your name and a little bit about your photography and what you like to shoot and maybe how you found our club and maybe what you're expecting to get out of it.
Well, my name's Jeanette, and I like to take photographs of whatever I'm doing outside, but he's new. Your turn.
Oh, my name's Pablo, and yeah, it's just a hobby, and we also paint, and we're thinking that the theme of this evening would enlighten us for a lot of things besides just photography, but photography in landscape, people portraits, still life, just general life events.
Yeah.
It's fun to journal. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Welcome.
Awesome. Well, Pablo and
Oh, and
glad you made it.
Ryan Webb invited us.
Oh, okay.
You know him.
I don't know him personally, but
Okay.
Yeah.
Pablo, I did see that you mentioned that in one of the forms that you filled out on the website. We don't have anybody in our club named Ryan Webb. So I'm glad Ryan was on top of things and got you into the club here.
Okay.
But I don't know who he is.
He was in the meeting last time I did a Zoom.
Okay. I think we are done with our introductions and such of visitors and such.
Okay.
So
Any special announcements, Carl?
just two minor things. Obviously, we've got a competition April 24th. Our subject is rule of odds. It sounds like a very simple thing. I have an odd number of subjects in there. And the March newsletter did have a couple of links to some informational sources. We're not just looking for something that has 3 or 5 or 7 or 9 things in it. Obviously, there needs to be a little more to it than that. But so again, that's in 2 weeks. And to any of the executive board members who are present this evening, I will be sending an email on Friday. We will have a board meeting via Zoom next week. So I will be looking for your inputs on dates that work for you so we could all get together for about an hour and talk about all the club stuff. So that is all I have, sir. So Kyle, if you would take it away.
I will. I'd be happy to. Thanks, Carl. So tonight's presenter is Robert deJonge. and he is a Michigan-based photographer, and I'm really excited. I was only recently, about less than 3 years ago, introduced to the breathtaking beauty that is Western Michigan. And that's the region that that is Bob's specialty, especially not limited to, but especially the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore. And I'm sure we're going to hear about that tonight. Just a quick background. I kind of know Bob because, well, I didn't actually meet him at my wife's stepmom's 80th birthday party a couple of years ago, but I was there and Bob was there and there were a lot of other people there. A couple months later, I was wondering aloud to my wife if I wanted to maybe make a concerted effort to take my photography into the sort of slightly professional realm. And my wife suggested I reach out to Bob. She said, you know, that really tall guy that was at Anna's birthday party. Didn't you meet him? I didn't, obviously, but I reached out to Bob via email, told him that we were at the same party and didn't meet, and he was extremely generous with his time with me via email, and got a lot of great advice from him. So when I took over the program's chair role for our club, he was the first person I thought of. So Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, well, it's great to be with you folks. Yeah, I'm a West Michigan-based photographer, and I guess I'm just going to start right in with, if I can share a screen. I think that's the best way to get going here.
Yep, if you would, that's the way we roll.
I have a background as an artist. I was a graphic designer for many years, so that's where I came from. So I have dabbled in a lot of different art forms, and so, but photography is where I really found a lot of joy. So that's where I kind of settled in. I'm going to do a quick advertisement here. As Kyle mentioned, I spent a lot of time at Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore, which is up in the very northwest corner of Lower Michigan, the Lower Peninsula. If you know, Michigan's actually two peninsulas. But anyway, that's where I get a lot of inspiration. So you'll see quite a few images from that area. I have a book, a coffee table type book, which I sell to many bookstores. And Synchronicity Gallery in Glen Arbor is a gallery that represents my work. Just so you get an idea where it is, it's up in what we kind of call the pinky of the Lower Peninsula. This little area right there was preserved back in the mid-70s is when the federal government started, 1970s is when the federal government started preserving this land. It's a gorgeous piece of land. The reason I really love it is it's 35 miles of lakeshore that's included in the park, plus a lot of inland areas. I forget how many thousands of acres are all part of this, plus 2 islands. There's North Manitou and South Manitou Islands, which are also part of the lakeshore. So it's a gorgeous area, and that's it's about 2.5 hours north of where I live. So I spend a lot of time driving back and forth up there. I enjoy figuring out where people are coming from. I think that tells you a lot about when they have to present something. So this is not because I'm narcissistic or anything, but I just want you to get an idea of where I'm coming from so that, yeah, it gives you some background as to why I do and what I do and how I do it. I have always been a visual learner, and I didn't really discover or understand that until, probably in my college days. But I have found that I learn mostly by seeing things, not by hearing them. And of course, back in the day when I was in grade school, and probably still a lot today, a lot of the teaching ends up being lecture, that kind of thing, which wasn't real helpful to me. But I learned to cope, did all right, but I was greatly encouraged by a grade school art teacher. So I have a real affinity for teachers. Third grade art teacher just really encouraged me to pursue visual things. I drew, I painted, whatever. I always dabbled in visual things. I took oil painting lessons, I think when I was in, say, 9th grade. And when the middle school I was in wanted a photographer to take pictures for their yearbook, I really had very little experience as a photographer, but I volunteered right away. So that's what I did. High school, I fell into the audiovisual department there, helped out with bringing equipment around to classrooms, and the same thing happened in college. I ended up spending a lot of time delivering equipment around campus. My parents, being good parents, of course, they're thinking very practical. They were both brought up in the Depression. So practicality was very important to them. And they thought, well, a good career is engineering. And I thought, man, why not? So I did 2.5 years of engineering. And after 2.5 years, I decided, I'm really not enjoying this a whole lot. And I'm going to follow my heart and go into art, which deeply disappointed my parents. They were expecting, what are you going to do with art? Well, I said, I'll find out. I'll find out what I'm going to do with art. And so I ended up getting a job as a graphic designer, photographer, writer. It was a small organization that needed kind of a jack of all trades. So I did a little bit of everything. But one of the things I had to do was document a lot of this organization's events. So did a lot of photography. I had a little darkroom. Of course, this was back in the day of film and processing with chemicals and everything. So I did that. Maybe a year and a half into my job, I was traveling out to Canada. I went to Vancouver, and I had a 6-hour layover in Vancouver airport, and thought I'd check out the bookstore. And I found a book by a photographer named Freeman Patterson. He's very well known in Canada, not so much here. But if you ever get a chance to check out Freeman Patterson's work, it's well worth it. Does beautiful stuff. But when I looked through his book, it was like, yes, this is what I want to do. This really cemented it for me. And right away I attended one of his workshops. And then in subsequent years, I attended several other workshops. Stephen Johnson, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was one of the first guys that was really getting into digital stuff. He did a lot of stuff. He's based in California, I believe, did a lot of stuff at Yosemite. John Paul Caponigro, son of a famous photographer that also is very, very good. I took a class with him at the, I think it was the Miami Beach photographic workshops down in Florida. And Ernst Haas, who was a premier photographer in the 50s and 60s. I happened to catch him. It was just a couple of years before he died, but he was very influential in what I like to do. And one of the ways that I increased my knowledge and my experience was through artists in residencies. A number of national parks have them, and some arts organizations have them. I found them to be very valuable. The first one I ever did was at Sleeping Bear Dunes. Usually it's a 2 or 3 week. They all run them differently. 2 or 3 weeks there. You have to make an application, show your work, and so on. But Sleeping Bear Dunes was my first one, about 2.5 weeks. I did Acadia National Park in Maine. I did Petrified Forest up in the very northeastern corner of Arizona, and Porcupine Mountains Wilderness State Park, which is a state park in Michigan up in the Upper Peninsula, and then Isle Royale National Park, which that was, I guess I have to say, my favorite. It was a beautiful place. It's this island. It's out in the middle of Lake Superior, very isolated. They give you a little cabin way off by yourself, and at night you hear the wolves howl, and during the day you watch moose walk around, and it's a gorgeous place. Anyway, that's kind of my background. I view myself as primarily as an artist that happens to use a camera and a computer. And that's where I feel like I'm doing, my best work is just thinking as an artist and using those tools. And I use them however I feel like I need to use them to best express what's in my head and my heart. I feel like you gotta have to balance those two things, the intellectual part of creating art and the heart part of creating art. That's I think an important balance to, you know, you don't want to become too heady or get kind of pretentious, and you don't want to go the way of just the heart and you kind of become kind of sappy. And so, you know, balancing those things is what I try to do with my work. I think it's very important. I firmly believe in the interaction of all the arts and that they all have something to give, to provide to us, to do better work. I love music and theater and poetry and whatever creative stuff is happening, I try to take in. I go to concerts and yeah, whatever I can, I think is important. Two words I'd like to say I kind of live by, and one is exploration and having fun. I think that for me, the real joy in creating art as a photographer is exploring. I love to look at all different environments. I don't want to dismiss any part of this world that I think I might enjoy. So I really, that's what really gets me going. That's what gets me up in the morning, is just being curious and then having fun with it. And as a graphic designer, as a design person, I knew all the rules of design. You know, a lot of, when you first start with photography, you learn the rule of thirds, and you learn how to bring out the highlight, bring down the highlights, or bring up the shadows and all those kind of things. But I know those things, and those are important, but I think it's also important that you feel comfortable with breaking away from those design rules if it kind of fits what you're trying to say. And I guess it kind of goes without saying, I love Photoshop because it gives me a whole new world of things to do, and you can add plugins that allow other things. You know, I don't do real sophisticated Photoshop stuff, but I love to blend images and create panoramas and things like that. And so that's where I go with Photoshop. And I see my work as a photographer as a calling. I see it as something that I think everybody needs to find something that turns them on. I guess the easy way to say it. And I just feel like, you know, things in my life have led to me being an artist. And so that's where I spend my time. A lot of people have trouble equating photography with art. I don't know, I was very involved in an art council, art program up in Petoskey, Michigan, which is toward the top of the Lower Peninsula. And, you know, every year they would have a photography exhibit and they would have a fine art exhibit. And it always kind of bugged me because I saw what I was doing as fine art, just happened to be using a camera instead of a paintbrush. And so I would complain to them, you know, they, oh, that's Bob. Kind of, you know, give me a hard time about it. But that's the way I felt. And when I first got there, they wouldn't allow me to enter the fine art competition. They said, well, you have your own competition, the photography. Well, thankfully, about 5-6 years ago, the director of the organization allowed photography into the fine art. So typically I entered the fine art competition every year. Sometimes the photography, most times the fine art. I think a great way to become better at what you do is to study any kind of, especially as a photographer, any kind of visual art. And I am kind of an art history nerd. I like studying all the different movements in art, you know, classicism, impressionism, expressionism, surrealism, modernism, postmodernism. You know, I think if you look at art, go to museums, take it and say, oh, I kind of like that idea of what they're doing there. That's a great expression. And I always like to say, good artists borrow, great artists steal. I think that's been used by a number of people in the design world, that statement. And I think that's true. You're always building on what somebody else has done. And that's what I tend to do too. I mean, I have some favorite artists and I look at what they do and how they did it. And sometimes I try to emulate that in what I'm doing. And I think it's also important to be a really good observer. And that's one thing I discuss a little bit in my latest book, this one that's called Awake at Sleeping Bear. I talk about being a good observer, taking time. I mean, there are times when I go out to photograph, I bring my camera along and I don't even click the shutter once because I'm just taking in information. I'm listening, I'm seeing, I'm smelling, I'm even tasting sometimes, you know, things out there just to kind of get a sense of the whole environment and what I have to work with. And then other times I'll go and I'll be taking a lot of pictures. I guess, you know, I've led plenty of workshops, going out on, you know, field trips. And one thing I see often is people tend to get a little trigger happy, I call it, where they, you know, just, oh, that's great. And they just start snapping away pictures. And I think sometimes you just have to slow down, take in the scene, you know, see what's going on. Of course, there are always exceptions. I mean, if you're a street photographer, sometimes things are just happening really one on top of the other. And you just have to snap the shutter when you can and hope for the best. But if you have time, take the time. I think that's an important thing. And I'm going to go through some of my art that I've done over the years and just to kind of show you what's possible with a camera and a computer to create, I think, decent art. And I think if the public sees you having a lot of fun and exploring possibilities, they'll see your stuff as art. And so, like I say, I think you have to have fun with it and explore and be creative and curious. Some folks get a little intimidated by the idea of using the computer, you know, using the software. You know, Photoshop is a very powerful piece of software. I've been using it from almost the time it came out. I guess it was like the mid-90s, 1990s. So I've learned a few things over the years, but I by far don't use all the things that Photoshop can do, but it is powerful. And some of the stuff I do is really fairly basic. So it's not like I'm really doing some really wild and crazy things. But I'll get to some of the pictures and we'll see what I do. This is an interesting picture, kind of both realism and impressionism. A couple of years ago, my wife and I traveled to the Netherlands. You know, with the name deJonge, you have to go visit the homeland. That's where my great-great-grandfather came from. But we were in this little cafe in the town of Haarlem. So this is not Harlem, New York. This is Haarlem in the Netherlands. And if you know anything about the Netherlands, there's a massive bicycle commute every morning and evening because everybody there rides bicycles to work and home from work. And I was just sitting in this cafe watching all these bicycles go by. And I thought, oh, that's kind of fun. I'll just start taking pictures of the people on the bicycles. And so I took out my iPhone, and this is all created via an iPhone. I just took multiple shots. I probably took, you know, maybe 40, 50 shots of the bicycles going by the front window of this cafe. And then when I got home, I just started layering. You can layer and you can change the opacity of the layers. And just started laying one layer of bicycles on top of another layer of bicycles. And so the edges of this are kind of realistic and the middle is kind of impressionistic. I just did the layering segment right in the middle. I also think presentation of your art is important to show that it's art. And I think it's important to do a good job. And I see matting and framing as part of the art. This is kind of a dual piece that I did. They're framed and matted separately, but I see them as one piece. And they happened years apart. The top part happened in that same trip to the Netherlands. I was in a community that's known for its glass blowing school. And I took pictures of these racks that they had of I think it was samples of colors that you can create with different minerals in the glass. And I just took pictures of all these racks, and they had all these little like blown bubbles. I just thought, oh, what a beautiful array of colors. So I just took a bunch of pictures of that. And then probably 3 or 4 or 5 years prior to that, I was walking around Edinburgh, Scotland. I had a daughter that lived in Scotland back then. And so we went to visit, and I was just walking up and down the streets in Scotland, and I saw this street grate. It was just on the ground. I don't know how old it was, but it had all these like little panes of glass in it, and all these glass panes looked like they had absorbed the minerals, and then that changed the glass different colors. And people just walked over this thing every day. I'm sure many didn't pay attention to it. I found it fascinating, so I just sat there and took some pictures of this grate. And then when I had come back with this picture of the glass samples, for some reason it clicked with me. I said, it reminds me a lot of this grate I took. And so I kind of combined them into one piece, and I call it the color calculator. It's like the bottom piece is kind of a keyboard, and the top piece is kind of the output. And that's the way I kind of see it. This is a picture I took up on the dunes. Up on the dunes where I go a lot, there are a lot of poplar trees. And being on top of a dune and being near a lake, a massive lake, Lake Michigan is huge, there's always wind. And so I wanted to try to capture the feeling of the movement. These poplar leaves, I'm sure being in Colorado, you've been up in the mountains there, and the aspens, which are a lot like poplars, the leaves tend to flutter as the wind blows. And I thought, well, how can I capture both the movement of these poplars and the beauty of a poplar? I mean, the ones that I saw had these beautiful like gold rims on them. And so I took a few static pictures, and then I took a few where I really slowed the shutter speed and took some motion images. And then when I got home, I cut out in Photoshop the static one and placed it on top of the motion. I think it turned into a very interesting piece. Call this one Dune Poplar. Very simple. And I don't always just do nature stuff, obviously. This art council that I was part of is in a town called Petoskey, which is up, maybe it's just a half mile short of the Mackinac Bridge, which connects the upper and lower peninsula. Beautiful community. And I wanted to do something that spoke about the community of Petoskey. And so I just went around and took a whole bunch of pictures of doors of the synagogue, the city hall, the art center, the hardware store, some homes, the Catholic church, and just collected all these pictures of doors, and then I put them together in Photoshop. And I thought, well, how can I express them, make them feel like they're part of one thing, kind of a community? And I came up with the idea of putting them in a circular frame. And so that's what I did, that sense of unity that is created by using a circle. Yeah, I just think it's a very interesting group of images put together. This is at Sleeping Bear Dunes. I just sitting at the lakeshore one night, and the sun was setting, and right on the horizon, it was just really kind of strange. The sun was just a little ways above the horizon, but right on the horizon, there was like this crack in the clouds, and it created this little red line. And I thought, well, that's fascinating. So I took out my telephoto, captured that line, and then I thought it would be neat to see all the beautiful textures of that water all the way to the shoreline. So I just snapped a series of pictures, each time focusing a little closer, a little further down toward the shore, down, down, down. This is probably made up of 7 images, probably blended together. So, and that way you can get everything in focus. You know, if you're using a telephoto, you oftentimes you have a very shallow depth of field. So each time I would refocus, take a little closer, all the way to the shoreline. And that's now this one I think I call the red line. This is up near Petoskey where I lived. Some massive snowfalls there in the winter. And cross-country skiing is something I'd love to do. So I was out one day cross-country skiing on some conservancy land, and I got lost. And I happened upon this old trailer in the woods that obviously somebody had been using as a deer blind. And there was a chair sitting in the doorway. And so I took some pictures of the trailer and the chair, and then I thought, well, I'm gonna take a vertical panorama. You know, you can blend things very easily in Photoshop to, you know, you can just tell it, oh, I want you to blend these 5 images, and it'll blend them and stick them all together seamlessly. And so I created this first image, actually was just the trailer and everything above it. And then I used did a little bilateral symmetry here. You can see the trees are the same on both the right and the left. Combined them that way to kind of create I don't know what I was trying to think here. It's almost kind of a cathedral-like look above the trailer. And a few years again prior to this, creating this image, when I was doing the artist in residency up in the Porcupine Mountains. I came across a deer skull. And I thought, okay, deer skull, deer blind. Oh, let's see if I can somehow combine them. And I had taken this deer skull and placed it on a stump and took some pictures of it. I thought I can blend these two together and create kind of a whole thing about hunting and leaving and whatever. I'm not sure quite what I was trying to say, but it kind of came together. I think it came together quite well. I call this one Deer Departed, as in D-E-E-R, Deer Departed. This one has a long story behind it. I don't know if I should tell that, but this one's titled Cathedral. My father was a World War II veteran, and he landed at Normandy about a month after D-Day, so he wasn't in the initial wave, which was a good thing. But he fought his way, he was in Patton's Third Army, fought his way across northern France, ended up in a battle near the town of Metz. If you're familiar with France at all, it's in the Alsace-Lorraine region of France. And there's a beautiful cathedral there. Well, it just so happens my father was captured by the Germans near the town of Metz. And so I wanted to visit there, and I took pictures of the cathedral in Metz. And I did a 180-degree panorama. You know, I just set up my little tripod on the floor of the nave of the cathedral and took a picture looking straight ahead, and then up a few degrees and up again, all the way around till I was facing the other side of the cathedral. So it's a 180-degree panorama of the top of the cathedral. And pieced that all together, and I really liked the piece. It was a great piece of the cathedral. And probably about a year later, I thought, you know, it would be really interesting to combine this cathedral piece with the canopy of a forest. And so one of the places my father loved was northern Michigan, that Leelanau Sleeping Bear area. And so I went up there with the idea of I'm going to do another 180-degree of a forest canopy, which I did. Then I came back and I laid the forest canopy picture on top of the cathedral picture and kind of toyed around with aligning things and created this piece that is both a man-made structure and a creation structure. And anyway, and I think it works pretty well. And I kind of see it as a tribute to my father, who loved both, you know, serving his country and loved this part of the world, this little neck of Michigan. So that's the story behind that piece. This one I call Living on the Edge. This again, I tend to do a lot of vertical panoramas. I don't know what there is about vertical panoramas, but it's something I love to do. Took this picture right near my home here, about 15, the town I live in, which is Spring Lake, is only about 15 minutes from the shoreline of Lake Michigan. There's a beautiful state park here, so I go over there, take pictures of the state park. And again, I wanted to show everything from what was down by my feet all the way to the beautiful sky that was at night. I don't often do black and whites, but for some reason, this one spoke to me as a black and white. So, and I just noticed all these neat little bubbles forming right on the edge of the wave as it came up the beach. Just a lot of beautiful textures. I'm a texture person. You'll see a lot of textures in my work. This was also on a trip I took to both Belgium and the Netherlands. The port of Antwerp in Belgium is noted as, I think it's like the second or third largest seaport in Europe. And of course, there's all these container ships coming in, and it was happened to be a kind of a blah gray day. And I started taking pictures of some of the container ships. I noticed, oh, it's kind of a modernistic, abstract pattern, all the different colors and cubes. And also on the shoreline of the river there at the port, where there are all these refineries. And being a gloomy day, I thought, yeah, this industrial kind of feel. I could create some statement about industrial things. So I took the pictures of the container ships, took a picture of the refineries, and just plopped one on top of the other, basically. Kind of give you an industrial commentary on industrial modern world, I guess. This is one of my favorite places at Sleeping Bear Dunes. This is called Sleeping Bear Point. It's a little peninsula that sticks out into Lake Michigan, facing north. And if you're lucky, once in a while, you see the Northern Lights. So I was up there. I took a panorama on a night when the Northern Lights were out. Also capturing over there toward the left is the beginning of the Milky Way. And about 2 days prior to taking this shot, I captured a comet. So this wasn't actually there the same night as the Northern Lights. That would have been really fortunate, but it wasn't so. But I thought, oh, I can combine it. So I just took the picture of the comet and combined it with the Northern Lights and the Milky Way. And I don't know, I call this Once Upon an Evening. And yeah, I'm altering reality a little bit, but that's what artists do, don't they? Again, Sleeping Bear Dunes. This is another dune area. This was in the fall, and in the fall, there's a lot of these what I call beach willows, and willows tend to turn red in the fall. And so I really was enjoying seeing these willows. And a lot of people think that the only place you see turquoise water is in the Bahamas or something, but the waters around Sleeping Bear Dunes also turn this very beautiful turquoise color. I'm told it's because there's a certain algae in the water that does that. But anyway, I love the play between that beautiful turquoise color and the red of the willows. They're kind of complementary colors, so they kind of vibrate. Again, a panorama. This was taken probably with 7 or 8 shots, which I asked the computer through Photoshop to stitch together. And it did it. The computer did it all. All I had to do was say, here's the images, put them all together in one piece. And it did. Again, up on the dunes, Sleeping Bear Point. One thing I like to play around with too is different focal lengths. Oftentimes there are things in the distance that kind of fade into oblivion. So sometimes I'll take a mid-range lens, capture something that's close to me, and then zoom out a little bit. And in the middle there, you'll see some kind of look like dead trees. That's called a ghost forest. Often these dune sands, they shift all the time. And sometimes they cover up the trees, and sometimes they uncover trees. And trees that have been covered and then uncovered are almost like preserved, they're almost like petrified. And so in the middle there, you'll see some trees from a ghost forest, and then way in the distance, if I were to use the same lens, you would barely see the South Manitou Island and the South Manitou Island Lighthouse. And I said, oh, you know, it should be nice if you could really see that lighthouse. So I zoomed way out, zoomed in, I guess, on the lighthouse and took a picture of that. And then I combined them again in Photoshop. So if this were taken with all one lens, you would barely see the island and the lighthouse. But I combined them to bring the lighthouse a little closer and to create my composition. One thing that's part of Sleeping Bear Dunes, again, it's not just the dunes. It's like I said, it's 35 miles of lakeshore and a lot of inland land. And one thing the park preserved, maybe not even on purpose when they first acquired the land, was they acquired a lot of old homesteads. And it's a good share of these old homesteads are in an area called Port Oneida. And, you know, back in the day, back in the, you know, 20s and 30s, 1920s, 30s, 40s, you know, when you were done with something, you just drove it up into the woods or took it up into the woods and dumped it. You know, people didn't get rid of stuff the way they should have. That's what it was. Well, I was walking back behind one of the old homesteads in a ravine, and the first thing I came across was a huge pile of old beer cans. And then beyond the old beer cans was this 1952 Buick just sitting out in the woods. Again, I created a panorama. I sat in the back seat, which was just bare springs at that point, because I don't know how long it's been sitting. Probably 40, 50 years it's been sitting out in the woods. So all the upholstery was gone. But anyway, I just sat in the back seat and used a wide angle lens and took pictures starting on I think on the left and going to the right. And I also bracketed each of those pictures because the interior lighting was a lot dimmer than the outside the knocked out windows. So I had to create a dynamic range, high dynamic range, HDR, if you've heard that term, which gave me a correct exposure for both the outside and the inside. So this is probably a combination of 21 images, because I probably did 7 images across and maybe 3 to 5 images, different exposures of each of those 7 that created the panorama. This is a pretty straightforward shot, nothing fancy done with Photoshop here, but I just love this composition. This is one of the old outbuildings of one of the old homesteads at Port Oneida. And I just, you know, it's kind of a complex composition, but yet it's very interesting, kind of dynamic, because there's some diagonals. These farmers that lived here really struggled because, as you can imagine, a lot of the soil in this area was pretty sandy. So it wasn't very good for growing much. So they had to kind of make do with whatever they had and whatever they could. A lot of them cut down trees to sell to lumber yards, things like that. But this particular farm, I love it because the gentleman was very resourceful, and every time his outbuilding started to fall apart, he'd find some old corrugated metal and he'd nail it to the side of the barn or the outbuilding. And so you got these corrugated pieces of metal, some that rusted one way and some that, you know, just all these beautiful patinas. I just love the colors. So I included some of the siding that was near the window, and of course the old windows, and inside the old building there's a plant growing, and there's just a lot of things. And this was in the fall, and so an old apple tree that was near the house had these apples, and so I picked 3 that were actually they were on the ground already. Picked up 3 apples, set them on the windowsill, took some pictures, and this is what I came up with. Again, it's just thinking a little bit outside the box. This, yeah, like most of the manipulation here was strictly with moving some things around, like putting the apples on the windowsill, just positioning things just right to capture a little bit of the siding and the window and the stuff inside. Yeah, that's basically what that is. Again, here's one of the old houses. They are slowly, and I emphasize slowly, it's trying to restore some of the old homesteads. A lot of them, they've preserved the outside, but the insides are still waiting restoration. And I actually took this picture just about a month ago, and I took this from outside the house through a dirty window. So if you're gonna, so I was thinking, I'm not gonna get a very sharp image because I'm taken through an old pane of glass, but it turned out quite well. And Photoshop, you can get these sharpening tools that help sharpen the image a little bit, which I did. But again, this was an HDR image. I bracketed, I think, 5 or 7 shots of one thing. So that way I could get both the outside of the house in proper exposure as well as the interior. Yeah, and I played around with that, and there's these old boards sitting against the wall and that diagonal, whatever, I'm not even sure what that is. I think it's a board or a pipe or something. Just adds a little interest to the image. And apparently at one time, somebody must have painted this whole room green or something. And I don't know, it's bizarre. I don't think it's mold or anything. I think it's just old paint. But just again, a very interesting composition between having 2 doors on one side, a window on the other. Yeah. So Sleeping Bear gives you a lot of opportunities for a lot of different kind of photography. This is also a dune, but it's not Sleeping Bear. This is a place called Silver Lake Sand Dunes. And I was just walking up on the dunes in the evening. And this is where my art history kind of kicked in. I saw all these stumps sitting there. Again, probably the remnants of a ghost forest. And the first thing that came into mind was Salvador Dali. His work, he has these, watches, some of his favorite pieces were, watches sitting on the edge of a table and bent over the end, this real surreal stuff. And this image just came, what I was seeing just seemed so surreal to see this, in the background, there were these, just the wind had created these ridges in the sand, and the foreground had these things that had once been live plants that were now just stumps. Anyway, not a whole lot of work in Photoshop here, strictly just trying to get a good image of what struck me as a surreal type situation. I kind of like surreal, I guess. This again was at Port Oneida, the area, the old homesteads at Sleeping Bear. A lot of old corn cribs. So I was taking pictures of this corn crib. It was kind of neat because behind the corn crib was a red barn. And so between the cracks of the slats of the corn crib, you could see the red barn, and there were shadows of trees on the side of the old corn crib. And then across the street from the corn crib was this old house. And I took a number of pictures of windows in the old house. And after, I think it was probably weeks later, a lot of my stuff evolves over days and months and even years sometime. I had a photograph of the Manitou Islands with again, the turquoise water. I dropped those into the panes of the window, took the window, put that on the corn crib. I don't know, it just makes, I think, for an interesting composition. Again, you got some vibration happening there between the red lines on the corn crib and the turquoise of the water. Yeah, that window was not on the corn crib. I put it there in Photoshop. A lot of beautiful old barns is part of this Port Oneida area. Again, I just, how do you show the beautiful timbers and interior of a barn? Again, this is, doing both HDR and panorama. So this is probably, 7 or 8 shots in a panorama plus 3 shots of each of those 7 shots. So you're talking 21. So that I would get some color through the slats of the barn, the outside, which was a lot brighter, of course, than the interior of the barn. So, I know my technical stuff, but I'm using it with a purpose. I want to show both interior and exterior lighting. beautiful, beautiful old timbers in these barns, and it's I really give the Park Service credit for trying to preserve these structures. This again is at Sleeping Bear Point. There's a beautiful bluff that overlooks what they call the Manitou Passage. And just beyond the passage are the two islands, North and South Manitou. Back in the mid 1800s, they said 80 to 100 ships a day would pass through the Manitou Passage, steamships and sailing ships. They're all going from, the eastern Great Lakes, Lake Ontario. They come through the Erie Canal. Equipment, goods would come through the Erie Canal, typically not the boats. They would unload it, put it on lake boats, and they could take it all the way to Chicago via the Great Lakes. And so that was the main way they opened up the interior of the country prior to railroads, was sailing through this area in particular, which was a great protection for the ships. But anyway, it was a beautiful morning. Just prior to sunrise, you get the glow of the sun to the right side, and then you get this kind of alpenglow, which is kind of a reddish color that comes up opposite where the sun's rising. And so I kind of like to show both those different aspects of lighting in a panorama. This is the shoreline. This actually, I think, was taken with film. This is how old this picture is, taken with Kodachrome, probably Kodachrome 64 back in the day. And yeah, this is right before sunset. And, a lot of people would be taking pictures of the sunset. I look down and a lot of times 90 degrees to the sunset is where the cool shadows happen. So you're seeing all the ripples underneath on the sand on the floor of the lake. Just a shallow wave there, just a small wave. It's creating all these neat light patterns. And then as each wave hits the shore, it's creating a little residue. As far as it goes onto shore, it leaves a little residue. And so it was creating all these beautiful textured lines, which only became real visible as the sun got real low. Again, just I call this picture light wave. And it's all about light. It's all about just the right timing. Yeah, and being patient and just observant. Seeing all these lines that are etched in the shore. Another part of Sleeping Bear Dunes, there's a number of places where there's wetlands that are in the interior of the park. And I was just walking past this wetlands area, and all these reeds, these grasses were bent over and then reflecting in the water. And I just started seeing all these cool geometric shapes, I think, oh, how cool. And you have some symmetry going here and yet some asymmetry. Again, I took kind of a panorama, a group of shots. I called this one mid-century modern. It reminds me of kind of what happened in the 1950s with architecture, where arches and squares and all sorts of geometric shapes were placed together. That's Frank Lloyd Wright is kind of part of that. Again, my art history background, I like to those kind of things are that stuff that's in my head comes out when I observe things. I start seeing mid-century modern architecture when I look at these reeds. And a lot of people say, oh, you need that you got to shoot in the morning or the evening when you get that, that golden hour kind of stuff. And yeah, that's cool. That's a good time. But sometimes you don't get that. Sometimes you just get clouds and you get gray. And even gray can be really cool. This was standing on top of the dunes, again, at Sleeping Bear. And this cold front was coming in. And it was just creating the wind was just blowing the lake, and you could see the movement of the wind in the water. And yeah, I thought created a very kind of, again, surreal kind of, and then kind of also impressionistic view of the lake. Again, I was thinking, okay, how can I show this best as an impressionist piece? So took a picture of the lake. as this front came in. This was at Petrified Forest. I was artist in residence there for about 3 weeks. The cool thing with that artist in residency is if you've ever been to Petrified Forest, they do not have any camping there. The access to the park is only from like 8 in the morning till 8 or 9 at night. They close the gate. Well, my cabin they gave me happened to be inside the gate. So I really had the park all to myself early in the morning and in the evening. And I was just out watching the sunset one night. And if you know that area, you know, the colors of the rocks there, you know, there's a lot of iron and other minerals that create blues and reds and stuff. And it was one of these sunrises too, where it was cloudy, but there was just this little crack on the horizon where the sun could peek through. And anyway, I started playing around with the images I took that morning, and I started smudging the colors and creating just these horizontal bars of color as I was seeing them. And I created kind of this modernistic piece. Also that morning, I had flown into Phoenix to get to this place and rented a car there. And I rented this nice white Dodge Charger. As I was sitting there taking pictures of the sunset, I noticed there was this beautiful colors coming off the trunk and the top of my car. And so the bottom part of that piece is the top and trunk of my car. Again, softened a bit, but you know, it's exploring, it's having fun. Don't feel you have to do something the way it's always been done. Try something new. Try moving your camera. Try getting reflections off whatever is around you. Things like that. Like I say, to me, it's all about having fun, exploring, trying new things. Like I say, I get bored easily, so I try a lot of different things. This is Port Oneida 2. This was a very gray day. Wasn't real exciting. I was using a big telephoto lens, and in order to get a good still shot with it, I didn't have my tripod with me. I had to really crank up the ISO, which made the picture very noisy, very pixelated. But as it turns out, I think it kind of added to the picture, kind of gave it an impressionistic feel. So yeah, I'm probably shooting at 256,000th ISO, you know, just an unheard of ISO, really. But it worked. I just felt it really worked for this piece. Just these outbuildings right behind a set of poplar trees. So don't think that unless you can get it on a tripod and get a lowest ISO that it's not going to work. Well, here's an example of where a little noisy picture, I think, works. I just threw this in because this is kind of a simple image. This was just a one shot as I saw it. Again, I think it was early in the morning. The light was just coming up, so it created some nice shadows. Just shows how the wind and the that's one thing I like about the dunes. I'll just say this is it changes every time I go there because the sand moves all the time and it creates all different patterns. And so I just love the patterns I saw. Again, one little poplar leaf fell on the ground. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say here, but it's I just love the patterns there. One of the old houses that they've restored the outside of. I kind of threw this in because is this a black and white picture or not? Well, kind of and kind of not. What I did is I selected just the windows and then selected the inverse of that selection, everything but the windows, and made that a black and white. So, because if you look closely at the windows, there are some windows that have color in them. Some have some blue, some have some yellow, some have, so it's kind of black and white and kind of not. And I just thought it kind of gave it a surreal feel. That again, you know, somebody would say, well, you either black and white or your color. You have to be one or the other. I don't think so. I think you can be both. And I don't know who made those rules, but yeah, just break the rules. Try something new. Try explore something fun. This is the picture I took in Edinburgh, Scotland again. When I was there, it was between Christmas and New Year's. It was very gray. There was only about 6 hours of sunlight every day. Scotland is quite far north. It's further north than the lower peninsula of Michigan. So their daylight hours are very short in the winter. But anyway, it was gray a lot of the time. So I thought, well, let's go with the flow. Why do I have to take static pictures or I have to really crank up the ISO or whatever? I just thought I'm going to just take pictures with motion, you know, they show motion. While I was just walking down Main Street, downtown Edinburgh, and I got behind this couple they're kind of walking arm in arm, and I just started snapping pictures behind them as they were walking. And, you know, the gentleman had his arm around the girl with a kind of turquoise coat on and a backpack. And anyway, I just started taking pictures, and there were some buildings in the background, some other colors, a very abstract piece, but I call this The Couple. And it's one of my favorites, actually. I really like how this turned out. It was just taking advantage, you know, going with what you're given. You know, sometimes you're in a situation where it's hard to stop the action because, you know, so it wouldn't be your typical street photography. This is creating an abstract because I was given low light and a lot of motion, and so that's what I went with. And again, this is Sleeping Bear Dunes. This was taken about a year ago. Again, you're lucky if you see the Northern Lights. This was taken, that house over there that you see was where I took that interior shot that you saw earlier. Anyway, there's a beautiful old maple there at this homestead. So when I saw the Northern Lights were going to be out, I hightailed it up there, started taking pictures. And just an interesting note here, this was 3 weeks after I had my knee replaced. So the doctor and the physical therapist got kind of mad at me for running around on a new knee that soon. But I mean, you can't not go when the Northern Lights are out, right? What you sacrifice for art. So anyway, that's I think the last slide I have. I hope what I'm trying to do is just get you to think differently, open up to possibilities. Don't look at things always necessarily the same way. Have fun with it, play around with it. You know, I know Photoshop can be a little intimidating, or other programs. I think Kyle, I had a look at his website, and I noticed he divorced himself from Photoshop. Must be fairly recently, but you know, so there are plenty of other programs you can use that do some very beautiful things that help you create interesting images. I think that's it. A lot of times, you know, when I go to workshops, I think of questions maybe 2 days after I was at the workshop. You know, it's hard to come up with stuff at the time of the workshop. So, you know, I'm happy to answer questions. My email address is michiganartisan@gmail.com, and my website is michiganartisan.com. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact me about what I do and how I do it. If you want to know some of the technical background to what I do. That's it. I don't know if there's anything else. If you have some questions, we can field.
I think Bob, I think there are going to be some questions, and I would like to comment that when I see, in the past, when I see composite work, I usually think of, you know, somebody photoshopping in a full moon that's really low on the horizon that wasn't there in the original shot, and they just never move me. I always feel taken advantage of almost. And your stuff is, as you've been saying, artistic and purposeful, and the texture you bring out, to me, just very moving, really.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, for me, when I create stuff, I don't want to make it look so bizarre, you know, which a lot of the real extreme people with Photoshop will do. I wanted to have it be, yeah, it's obviously surreal or obviously it's abstract, but there's also a natural feel to it. It's not just, like I say, it's very purposeful. I'm trying to kind of make a statement with what I'm doing. And sometimes that takes a while. Like I say, I combine images maybe, 2 months or 3 months or even 6 months or a year after I've taken the images. All of a sudden they'll click. I'll say, well, if I took that image I did, a year ago and combine it with one I did recently, that could be kind of cool. So yeah, it doesn't all happen at once. Things kind of come together in different ways. So
Yeah.
give yourself time. Time is a great way to, I really admire people that, can do weddings and events and stuff like that. I just, I'm not a guy that really thinks really quick on my feet kind of guy. I'm more deliberate over time kind of person. And so that's why landscape works well for me, and static things like old houses and barns. And then again, they tend to evolve.
Yeah, no kidding. Does anybody, I'm sure there's somebody that has a question out there. Or not.
Yeah, I'm not hearing anything, but sometimes it takes, like I say, it takes a while to absorb what you've seen or what you've heard from me.
Yeah.
That's okay. Like I say, you've got my email address if you want to ask about a particular way I approach things, or, even some of the technical aspects of it, feel free. You may think about, oh, 2 days from now, a week from now. That's okay. I've thrown a lot of stuff at you. So sometimes it can get kind of overwhelming. I know when I've taken workshops with other people that are leading it, it takes me a while to process all that information.
Well, it's got me thinking about my catalog, my pictures in a whole new way.
Yeah, same here. Yeah.
This is Mark here. I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah.
I was paying attention, and I think although you did do a lot of combining of things, I think you took all of the elements with a camera, with your own camera. This is all your work. It's just that it's combined.
Right.
Thinking specifically of the the barn with the window and the sea and so on and so forth. But a question that comes up in this photography club and another one and all over the place is Photoshop's generative fill, where the element you add didn't come from your own camera. Can you give us some words about your own philosophy and thinking about this particular aspect of photography?
Yeah, I think when you're mentioning generative fill, because they call it AI, sometimes it'll fill in with stuff that's outside of what you've created. I would not be a big fan of that. I like to use elements that I've captured. But again, I'm often, if I'm going to combine images, it's because I have a statement. I have something I want to say. And, I'm not pretending that what you're seeing is actually a realistic image. It's altered, and I mean, I had an interesting experience when I was the artist in residence at Sleeping Bear. I got some very interesting images, and every year they have a poster contest to advertise their they have what they call the Manitou Music Festival, and they bring in some groups to play, and they set up at the stage at the base of one of the big dunes, and it's really a neat event. But they use visual artists to create the poster, and I entered several of my pieces, and I noticed after looking back at previous posters I couldn't see anyone that looked like they were used photographs. It was all paintings. And so I said, you didn't say anything in the specs for this, and one of the judges came back and said, well, we believe that photography is what happens, the thing that you've captured once the shutter has closed. So basically they're saying they didn't want to see any manipulation. That's not really photography. And so I had to explain to them, you know, photography by its very nature is manipulative. I mean, you're taking a 3D thing and you're putting it on a 2D piece of paper or film back in the day. And, you know, you're cropping, you're just selecting certain things. That's all manipulation. Just Photoshop gives you a greater range of manipulation. So, you know, it's kind of frustrating because, you know, there are some people that still believe that photography has to be this realistic, ultra realistic view of things when it doesn't. I don't know if I'm really answering your question here, but I'm okay with doing some fill, but if I like to fill it with stuff that I've created, not stuff that just came off the internet somewhere. So, and I find it not very helpful to get stuff off the internet to fill. So,
Sort of a follow-on. Would you make a distinction between using generative fill to simply remove an element versus adding an element?
yeah, well, typically if you're filling with an element, it's taking information from other parts of your picture. You know, like if there's a person standing out in the field and you don't want the person in the picture, so you just say, you know, put a lariat around it, the lasso around it, and say replace with, you know, fill, and it'll take some of the grass from nearby and fill it in. But if you're putting something, adding a new element, you know, you can ask it to look for a picture of a horse, and it'll find a picture of the horse on the internet and stick it in the field. Yeah, I don't really like, because I don't know where that image came from or who actually created that image to start with. And so, yeah, I don't consider that necessarily all my work if it's bringing stuff in from the internet.
Well, I'm just I'm kind of, as I started to say, I'm interested in going back through a lot of my photos that I previously thought were no good. I don't delete anything, so maybe I've got a new project, which is great. But Bob, really appreciate your time and the sort of like new angle that you've brought to you know, an old hobby.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah, I call myself a picture hoarder. I rarely throw away any of my images because sometimes, you know, so I have these big 10, 12 terabyte hard drives full of stuff. But I often find that, yeah, 3 months down the road, something I didn't consider, I thought, oh, you know, I did take a picture of that. And even though I didn't think it was very good at the time, maybe that could be useful for such and such, you know? And so, and that's the way I think, you know, when I'm out in the field taking pictures, oftentimes when I'm looking through the viewfinder, that thing I'm seeing in the viewfinder, I don't see as my final image, or maybe only part of the final image. So I see myself as a collector, you know, I'm just collecting elements that can be either stitched together or used and combined in different ways.
Yeah.
So, you know, because a lot of times there can be stuff in an image that just doesn't turn me on, but there's another part of that image, a section of that image that really works. Well, I can use those parts. So it's kind of funny how, yeah, like I say, a week down the road, month down the road, a year down the road, I'll start thinking about something I shot, you know, way back when, and that element will fit with something new I'm working on.
Yeah.
So you just never know. So
I don't know. I think probably your background in graphic design probably feeds that thought process as far as, you know, taking components, you know, taking a piece of this and a piece of that. I think that probably informs you
Oh, yeah, definitely.
As far as,
definitely. And I-
taking the bits and pieces and putting them together, because graphic artists do that all the time.
Right, right. Yeah, and I always encourage people who are just getting into photography, so like, go take a design course. And that helps you to learn how things can be put together and how, so, that helps. Most community colleges will have a design class or something that you just take a semester or even less than a semester. Sometime they have 3 or 4 classes on just basic design. So you can show how, because knowing things like how diagonal lines give a sense of action, whereas horizontal lines give a sense of pastoral feeling, and those kind of things you learn about, and then you can go from there. So I would encourage anybody to take a simple design class, that if they want to increase their sensibility about what creates a good composition.
It's great advice. Thank you.
All right. Well, it sounds like that's going to do it tonight. Really appreciate your time. And I know that Bob's in the Eastern time zone. Michigan is unbelievably somewhat in the Eastern time zone. So it's almost 10 there. So we'll let you get to bed.
I'm a morning person, so this is past my bedtime.
Indeed. It would be mine too. So thank you so much, Bob, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Well, it was great being with you, and I hope I helped some of you guys be better at being artists with your camera. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Oh,
you.
absolutely. This was very informative, very wonderful, and eye-opening. And hopefully, a lot of people will start thinking a little bit more about, like Kyle said, going through their old images and see what they can do with some stuff that they've shot already, or think more about when they're out shooting and using different components, different pieces of photographs, or just thinking differently about how they shoot things. So yeah, it was very, very interesting, very eye-opening.
good.
Awesome.
Okay, well, we'll see you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, yes,
Bye.
thank you.
Bye.